Billy. There you are again, greetings and welcome, dear friend, Ta. Ta. Greetings too, Edouard, dear friend. As Bermunda has already explained to you, you will not have to retrieve and write down as many conversations as before. But what we will talk about today will at least partly be a report of the conversation, which you can then publish. In order to mention right away what will be important, I want to take the floor right at the beginning and bring up what is to be said regarding the falseness of what is really going on between America, Ukraine and Russia, and which is not perceived and thus not realized by the state leaders and those of the parts of the population in their stupidity who are supplying weapons to Ukraine or who are even advocating this. These non-thinkers, i.e. stupid people of the Western world, are incapable of recognizing the truth that in reality America respites leadership and dark government are the real authors of the war in Ukraine. The fact that the reason and the posturing, as well as Zelensky's demands for weapons and the irresponsible deliveries of weapons serve to keep the war going until control over Russia is won, is not recognized due to the stupidity of the fallible arms suppliers and the supporters of arms deliveries. And that behind it all lurks America's delusion of world domination is not recognized at all by all the stupid ones, because in their false trust in America and in their American friendliness, which is just as false, they do not recognize the truth of the real reason for the war. This is, of course, reprehensible, just as any other act of war is reprehensible and can never be excused, for such an act kills and also desecrates human lives, destroys human achievements and damages and even irrevocably destroys nature and its fauna and flora. The American leaders who are fundamentally responsible for this and their supporters, excluding, of course, that part of the righteous human beings who are not of the same mind, who are hostile to Russia and therefore want to see this state destroyed, are human beings who are mainly addicted to an unreal religious belief and who vehemently advocate it. This is what we know for certain from very precise investigations and what makes it clear that in America, simply because of the diversity of religious and political beliefs, such discrepancies prevail even in the case of like-mindedness and also in the case of like-mindedness of views that there can be no real unity among like-minded people. What also needs to be mentioned is what you explained to me and what I was able to read in my father's annals. Consequently, I was also already informed about the partial mobilization before it was proclaimed. However, this does not change anything about the events that will inevitably come to pass and in which we will only be involved as observers until now. It is incomprehensible to me and also to our peoples, whom we inform about our activities and events on earth, that state leaders and parts of their populations can be so stupid that they neither see nor recognize what is actually being played out openly and also behind the scenes. It is also absolutely incomprehensible to us observers and judges, after we have fathomed Zelensky's character, his behavior and his attitude, that he is able to have persons around him who actually move around him surreptitiously, just as they also strive for his favor, which he only seems to show them. All of them, however, are not only playing with their freedom, for at any time he is able to get rid of them by imprisoning them and then letting them rot miserably. But those who are loyal to him only means so much to him that they also cannot be sure of their lives if he deems it necessary to get rid of them. The fact that this man Zelensky, who is addicted to megalomania and, moreover, imperious, as well as very exceptionally selfish, pathologically ambitious and greedy for attention, has created and also represents his own justice, is recognized neither by the state powers nor by that part of their populations who cheer this man, who is resistant to any criticism, and champion his demanded deliveries of weapons as legitimate, thereby making themselves guilty of a world war such as there has never been before on earth. The man Zelensky wants to be a human being of light, but in truth so much shadow surrounds him that he cannot find his way out of his mimicry and out of his malicious distrust. On top of all this, he is stubbornly authoritarian and so politically and humanly illiterate that he does not even have a clue as to how a people should actually be led and how human beings should be treated finely, justly and honestly. As an autocrat and ruler, which he really is, the human beings do not dare to contradict him, not even politicians, foreign state leaders. This has the effect that, in relation to his own state, he holds absolute power as an individual, consequently he decides as autocrat and the Security Council, which is in bondage to him, gives him a free hand to do as he pleases out of fear. The fact that he tolerates absolutely no opposition to what he stubbornly advocates, is up to and is capable of enforcing by any means is demonstrated by his demanding of weapons, etc., which his henchmen unwisely supply him with, enabling Zelensky, as a powerful warmonger, to continue the war as long as America deems it urgently necessary. But in this respect Zelensky is so stupid that he does not perceive and does not realize that he is actually an ignorant, stupid lackey of America and its dark government, which will drop him the moment he has done his due, as has been done all over the world by America so far. For America tyrants and dictators etc. were always a means to an end rest good and well-behaved as well as useful until what America wanted was fulfilled, after which the state powers autocrats, tyrants and dictators etc. used for this purpose were simply deposed or murdered and thus cleared the way for America to take up residence in the state in question. Billy. We have discussed this many times together in relation to America sneaking into foreign states in this nasty way, also along with NATO, which was after all founded back on the 4th of April, 1949, as per the aspiration of Harry S. Truman. Yes, in reality NATO is under the secret leadership and dependence of America, which even the people and the world population do not know. But it is worth mentioning with regard to the war in Ukraine that effectively America is behind everything and determines the course, because Russia is to be degraded politically, and as a state, by all possible means and made impossible among the world population. The fact that the same atrocities committed by the Ukrainian military are deliberately concealed and only those committed by the Russians are mentioned is an American tactic in order to use its perfidious actions in this regard to make the world's leaders and populations hostile to Russia. At the same time, America is deliberately concealing the fact that in the last two world wars in Europe and on Earth, as well as in the First World War in the years 1756 to 1763, the American military was equally ruthless, inhumane and criminal in war. This, as well as in the wars that America triggered and waged in Iraq as a result of deceit and fraud, as America with its military also spread atrocities, death and destruction in the same manner in Afghanistan as well as in Vietnam and Korea etc. and raged in a war criminal manner, as it also does not shy away from raping and then murdering girls, boys and women, because dead people can no longer speak and accuse. My words, however, should not and must not be misunderstood, for just as America acted in this wise and is acting secretly now, so it has always been customary in every war throughout the world and in every military to act in this manner and to carry out atrocities. So it is also the case in this war in Ukraine, on both sides of the adversaries, i.e. the Russians and the Ukrainians, so no distinction can be made. Both parties, Russia as well as Ukraine, are waging a criminal war, as such a war is never and ever right. However, in global partisanship against Russia, this war has been deliberately fomented by America, by its leadership, by the dark state leadership, as well as by the nationalists and part of the anti-Russian population, and in the background by NATO, thus everything is malicious against Russia in every conceivable form. This, while, on the contrary, the bloody war criminal machinations of the Ukrainian army are deliberately concealed. It is also deliberately concealed that American and various other states' warmongering and murderous military officers, mercenaries and adventurers, who murder, rape and destroy in war, are involved in the Ukrainian war and thus participate in war crimes, which are also fraudulently attributed to the Russian military. When the Russian President Putin is attacked and accused, it is of wrongdoing, because for his part he has nothing to do with the occurrences of the Russian military's war actions in this regard, consequently, he cannot bear control and responsibility for them, as is also the case with Zelensky regarding the Ukrainian military, whose military is also committing war crimes of a terrible nature, but which, as mentioned, are being blamed on the Russian military. Something that Zelensky-affiliated and America-affiliated people carelessly, and in their partisanship, take as truth. Furthermore, it should be clearly mentioned that the attacks against the man Putin are not justified in the manner that he alone is called the culprit, because in reality he also receives instructions and advice, and he is controlled by the Duma, even though he is the commander of the army. Consequently, he can only go and act as far as he is allowed because he is controlled, despite his command. So, with his command power, he can only go and implement his own attitude as far as he is allowed by the side that controls him and his orders and actions in the background. He is therefore controlled in the background, so that only what these powers want and allow him to do emanates from him and happens. His state leadership and actions are therefore dependent on other forces of might, consequently, he cannot simply do or not do what he pleases. And in the way we have fathomed him in his character and personality, he is of such a nature that he actually listens to and also obeys what he is told. According to our findings, however, this cannot be said of Zelensky's character and personality, for in this respect this man is cynical, self-important, dictatorially authoritative and does not tolerate any contradiction, just as he is absolutely unpredictably mendacious and lacks insight. In the service of America, he does exactly what is expected of him, as he endeavors with diatribes to generally discriminate against and portray the Russian leadership in a hostile light. But what will happen, as you told me and is also recorded in my father's annals, will indeed happen, as we ourselves have also investigated, and so, through the anti-Russian propaganda, as America and Zelensky effectively carry it out worldwide, the Russian population will turn against their leaders, and many will flee the country. The self-important Zelensky, the power-obsessed Ukrainian president, will immediately seize his insidious chance to incite the Russian people in his vicious, lying and human-deceiving manner. He will also demand that the Russian people resist the orders of the leadership, incite them to rebel and disobey orders. He will do this seductively in such a manner that many Russian men will be induced to flee to other states, especially those who are to be recruited. Consequently, however, their escape will bring them suffering, because their fleeing may be charged to them as desertion, which is why the fugitives must expect long prison sentences or even execution if the henchmen get hold of them. However, Zelensky in his delusion of power does not care about this, nor does the American leadership and the American dark power, nor do the parts of the anti-Russian population in America, nor do the leaders of foreign states and their parts of anti-Russian populations. Basically, it is the same in your homeland of Switzerland, in Germany and in all states of the EU and the earth that in all these states the Zelensky-friendly and America-friendly people do not care about the lives and safety of human beings, also those of the Ukrainian and Russian military who are dying in the war in Ukraine. And this is because, on the one hand, these human beings are foreign to them and they have no relationship to them, but on the other hand, because they are addicted to stupidity and thus to non-thinking, as well as to the propaganda partisanship. Consequently, they only raise their fists and curse in a biased manner against Russia and its military and war crimes in the war in Ukraine, without, however, having a true relationship of any kind to those human beings there and to the truth. However, in their own mendacity and self-delusion, those partisans do not want to admit this, who take the side of praising and representing one side, while cursing and condemning the other side, stupidly and without thinking that there are human beings on each side, who all have a right to their lives, but are being murdered in war by the madness of power-hungry political intrigues. What is objectionable about the behavior of state leaders and, in part, the populations of foreign states, is that weapons are being criminally advocated and supplied to Ukraine. This not only prolongs the war, but also kills many human beings, military and civilian, and senselessly spreads misery and distress, also in the wild and in the fauna and flora. Sanctions are also being senselessly taken and imposed, and in this regard I am not only referring to all that this false practice is being applied against Russia, but that this is done and customary in general against states that are to be punished for whatever reason by the imposition of sanctions. This ridiculous and, moreover, ill-considered approach is in no way suitable to harm the fallible leaders of those states against which sanctions are imposed. The truth is that it does not disturb them in their behavior and actions, but on the contrary, it causes hardship and misery for the human beings concerned, because it is they who suffer from the sanctions, not the leaders. The suffering humans, however, can never defend themselves against the actions of the state leaders, but are imprisoned in the mildest case or murdered on the other. Thus, the respective human beings are not able to influence the leaders of the state, but are always at a disadvantage. This is also the case in your homeland, Switzerland, because parts of the state leaders, in their stupidity, have seriously violated neutrality, namely as a result of the adoption of sanctions by the European Union and their application against Russia. In abbreviation EU, you call it a dictatorship, with which you say what this union really is, but which will not be permanent, but will be dissolved again in the future, as you yourself know from the future studies that you carried out with my father. But in regard to neutrality alone, I have to say that our entire Federation populations, which we keep informed of what is happening on Earth, which at present comprises 103 billion human beings on worlds within a radius of many light years, live entirely in peace and maintain a strict neutrality. We have publicized among all the peoples of the Federation the very distressing Swiss incident of neutrality violations by the sanctions adopted by the EU and applied against Russia, and put it forward for judgment, which was that such a violation of neutrality should never take place. It was uniformly said a billion times that real peace of a neutral state can only be guaranteed if no measures of any kind are ever taken against another state. It was also said a billion times that true neutrality would never allow a neutral state to join forces in any military maneuvers in the form of cooperative neutrality. This, however, is obviously what Switzerland is striving for, as you told me and explained, which is why I also brought up your statement that the Swiss leadership was considering conducting military maneuvers together with NATO, which truly embodies an organization that is murdering and destroying warfare on Earth. True neutrality, however, does not permit an erroneously and confusedly conceived cooperative neutrality, for neutrality requires that neutral behavior effectively prevails, which means and implies that nothing may ever be done that is in violation of neutrality. Neutrality, therefore, requires that no measures, of whatever character, may ever be taken against another people or that actions be carried out which violate being neutral in any wise. Neutrality requires, this must also be said and explained, that only through words may something be clarified and assistance be given, and this also only in a completely neutral form, consequently any form of partiality is and must be excluded. Only a conversation in a completely neutral way, that is, without any taking sides, as well as based only on effective facts, as well as without belief of any kind, without excitability or influencing and wanting to convince, can convey absolute neutrality. And with that, I have said all that I had to say. Billy. Quite a lot, but good and pertinent, consequently, I have nothing more to say in this regard. So there would be other things to address, like now that the corona stuff has died down a bit, we at FIGU continue to wear FFP2 grade respirators when out, as you recommended. This, even though we are sometimes looked at a bit askance. But what I really want to say is that, as I know, the demonstrations are now starting again, which are once again upsetting the world, as I know. This is happening again especially through the environmental freaks, mainly youth who have no life experience, but a big mouth, as well as older ones who are no better off. They are the ones who make Fridays for Future a topic of conversation again, whereby the demonstrators are also partly acting criminally and also obstructing car traffic, and not infrequently also causing damage. It is all well and good that something is being done demonstratively against environmental pollution and CO2 emissions, but the effective truth should be brought up that it is the human beings themselves in their astronomical mass of sheer 9.2 billion, 9,200 million, who are the greatest evil of all environmental pollution, environmental destruction, and all evil of all extinction of fauna and flora, as well as atmospheric poisoning and climate change. The entire destruction and total annihilation of all areas of vital nature, the waters and thus also the seas, including of course the very important normal forests, primeval forests and other oxygen-producing plants, can basically be traced back solely to the irresponsible machinations of the huge mass of overpopulation. But of this, the stupid demonstrators of both sexes do not cry out, for they only howl against the alarming causes of the destruction of the climate, but do not think of the fact that they must take themselves by the nose and would have to do without offspring for a long time. This is too much for them, for they are not only stupid, but do not want to know anything about it, because their copulatory urge and copulatory mania is greater and stronger than all truth, all understanding, and all reason. In order to eliminate the existing evils of environmental destruction, pollution and the slow but sure extinction of fauna and flora, the animal and plant kingdoms, as well as to bring the earth halfway back into order in all respects, unfortunately it is no longer entirely possible because too much has been completely wiped out or destroyed. It is urgently necessary that humanity be reduced. But this is only possible by effectively putting a worldwide stop to births, for as long as is necessary, after which a worldwide birth control must prevent a new overpopulation from arising again in excess. That is correct, but to get through to Earth humans with these words will probably not be possible, because stupidity unfortunately already spread more than 80 years ago in such a manner that it could no longer be stopped and even increased, and it will continue to do so for a long time. Only a few sane and sensible people found and still find themselves doing what is necessary, unfortunately, in the modern era of the new millennium. Billy. Unfortunately, because copulation has become such a craze among young human beings that it has even become socially acceptable in the form that it is finding more and more entry on television and thus already getting children to practice copulation. And the fact that there are more and more human beings also increasingly leads to the fact that so-called clergymen sexually abuse their believers, boys as well as girls and women. Prostitution has become a respectable profession and lawsuits are conducted for millions of dollars regarding alleged rape, as well as high dignitaries and title wielders can commit sexual abuse without being punished for it, or that they can get rid of it all by paying large sums of money. It is not uncommon for these practices to produce offspring, just as it is not uncommon for men and women to find each other because they have a big name, are well known, or have a lot of money, only to break up again when someone else comes along. It is also not surprising that many offspring become boozers and drunkards in later life, because their mother was already like that, as happens, for example, with greats who like to be admired on television or otherwise play a role in public. SFAF teaches me that offspring of such publicity seekers not infrequently fall into the vices their mother had. This is because when a woman is pregnant and drinks alcohol or takes drugs, etc., this is passed on to the life growing in the womb. The reason for this is that what the mother drinks or eats, etc., enters the amniotic fluid as special substances, and thus the life cycle of the new human being growing in the womb. This also determines which foods the human being will prefer after birth, because the newborn human being will also be guided by what the mother ate during pregnancy. Consequently, Svath explained, throughout their lives, human beings mainly eat what their mothers ate during pregnancy. He also taught me that after a certain age, the human beings growing in the womb react accordingly to sweet or sour food. If the head of the new human being is already developed, then you can see, for example, how the face turns sour or joyful, depending on what the mother eats, and thus infuses the amniotic fluid with the corresponding substances. Svath could let me see that on a screen. Ta. That is indeed the case, and as a trained doctor, he actually explained a lot to you as well. Billy. He did, but I never talked to anyone about that because it would have all been considered lies and boasting anyway. So I learned to keep quiet about that too, which I will continue to do. Ta. That is certainly good, but now I should leave soon, for my duties call me. However, I still have some matters of importance that I want to discuss with you. Billy. Excuse me, for I too have something else that I have wanted to talk to you about for a long time, but have kept putting off. Ta. Then you speak first, because yours probably will not be such that we cannot talk about it openly. Billy. You are right about that, because I just wanted to ask you if you had read any notes in the annals of Svath that refer to the military man Rami. The man who was in Roswell. You already know. Ta. There is not much to say really, because you know quite well what came about at that time. In my father's annals, too, there is nothing other written than that the man Rami told him and you that he had had no other option but to lie to the press. However, vis-a-vis he had to admit that everything publicized by the army and the state leadership was nothing but bare lies, and that what was photographed was nothing but metal foil brought there for the purpose. This foil had been described as the remains of a balloon, but this amounted to a fraud. Genuine materials from the very flat-built and plate-shaped object that had crashed and been badly damaged while flying over the Tikaboo Peak were not present as individual pieces, but rather it was still as an entire object at the site, as at that time Rami explained to my father Svath and you. This object was also as such a whole transported away by the military, namely including the still living bodies of the object's crew. Thus everything was immediately secretively seized, transported away, and taken to Homey Airport, Note Billy, Area 51, in the Nellis Air Force Restricted Area. Nonetheless, the report immediately reached the press, whereupon the news of a crash of an extraterrestrial spaceship very quickly went around the world. Billy. True, at that time I read in a newspaper myself that somewhere in the USA an extraterrestrial spaceship would have crashed. Which newspaper it was, that I can no longer remember. I can still remember this military man Rami, because he was scared as hell when Svath and I suddenly materialized in front of him, roughly in the same way as Adamski when Ascot and I suddenly stood in front of him, where he was giving his mendacious lecture in a large hall at Helvetiaplatz. Ta. I can imagine that. The same thing must have happened to this Ruppelt who worked for the Blue Book, whom you two also visited, and who had to admit that everything was geared towards denying the UFO question. Billy. Yes, I remember that man too. He also admitted that there were enough evidences, which then disappeared and had proven that the crash of the saucer had really taken place, and so on. This, among other things. Ta. Good. Do you have another question, because time is really pressing on me? Billy. Okay, that's it.